iDS Talks is a podcast dedicated to helping corporations and law firms find new and effective ways to leverage data, giving them a decisive advantage both in and out of the courtroom.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of iDS Talks. My name is Jonathan Sachs, Chief Revenue Officer at iDS, and I'm joined today by Hunter McMahon, iDS's Chief Operating Officer. We're here today to talk about tips for lawyers effectively managing and utilizing data. Welcome to the podcast, Hunter.
Thank you, sir.
Not our first go-around on this, but I do enjoy every one of them. That's not to suggest to the listeners that other speakers that come to the podcast, I like them any less. But Hunter, I want you to feel special, Hunter.
You're so kind.
Let's jump right into this topic because, you know, the notion of how data is impacting the practice of law today is fascinating to me, not just because I practiced law for 8 years, but because I'm now at a point where I have one of my own kids actually is interested in this topic. And so knowing we've got the current generation in it and next generation coming, I thought this was going to be a terrific topic for us to cover. But let's start with this first question, which is, all right, we know the world of data is changing. It's becoming more complex every day and is ever evolving. So that got to naturally lead to the question of, how does somebody even know where to start if it's evolving so quickly?
So think of it as your natural curiosity with something new, right? You have to explore. You have to start asking the questions. And it usually is not immediate actions, but rather stepping back and saying, okay, what does this look like? And taking small bites every step of the way. So if we're trying to understand Jonathan Sachs' digital life, where do you interact on a given day? What systems do you interact with? We'd simply ask, walk us through your day. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how much you can learn about somebody as well as what data sources are available through just take me through a day. Help me understand what systems you interact. And instead of asking about those systems as somebody is walking through their day, just let them walk you through their day. Because it's amazing how many things that we all interact with, different applications, different communication channels, different devices. I mean, I've got 4 or 5 sitting here on my desk now.
Right.
That, you know, which one alerted where, which device did I respond from, and, you know, which communication channel. That if you just listen to somebody and really be in that information consumption mode to begin with, that's where you start. You start by understanding, and you start by, well, how do you interact with that? You know, you get a little bit more, but you're asking open-ended questions so that you can have a true understanding of their interactions. Then you step back and say, okay, that's all great. I identified 33 different data points or potential data sources for Jonathan Sachs on a given day. I can't start with all of them. So then it's, okay, what ones or what data sources or what communication channels or what applications could give me the best information first? And you take one step at a time. Your first step may be 3 different data sources or 3 different communication channels or 3 different apps, but you don't go for all 33 right from the get-go. That would be extremely overwhelming, even for some of us that do it day in and day out. So again, you one step at a time, one iteration, you prioritize, you execute, and you evaluate.
Love it. Totally agree. I'm surprised you didn't lean more into the be curious. I know that's one of your favorites.
I can't do it with every question. That was staged for the later questions.
Oh, sorry. Spoiler alert. I think this is a great point. And I think that it's, you know, understanding, you know, what do you look at? What do you use? Because even if you say, well, what apps do you interact with? Some people may not remember. I think, though, if it's a day in the life, I talk to Hunter a lot. Okay, so someone's going to assume it's on the phone, or maybe it's you message on Teams. The reality is it can be on the phone. It can be Teams. It can be on my phone. It can be, if a company has Slack and other channels, And it could be that you and I play the same video game, and later in the evening we're chatting through that. Who knows?
Well, and you bring up a good point, is words can be deceiving in those conversations. So somebody saying they chat with somebody could be on the phone. That chat could be Teams, WhatsApp, Signal, text message, or a variety of other channels. And so when somebody says, hey, I chat with them, yeah, where do you click? And it's amazing. Or I store everything on my desktop. Kind of, sort of, not really. It's actually in OneDrive, or it's actually over here. And understanding that can help you understand where you really need to go.
Yeah. Okay. So data is ever growing, getting more complex. I think about, years ago, we heard a lot about big data. And I guess my question for you is, having heard about big data for years, how does the volume or size of data actually make a difference?
Great question. So to quickly clarify, big data is much more complex than just volume. It kind of has that notion, but a lot of people will associate big data with volumes of data. So focusing on that right now, the newer data sources that we're looking at, we can analyze them differently than we could traditional data sources. So if you go all the way back to the paper document, you read a document, you probably put different Post-it notes or color Post-it notes on it. Maybe you put it in this pile and that pile. If it belonged in two piles, you were putting copies in each one to try to organize your understanding of the data or the documents at that point. We then went to electronic documents where we could search and understand a little bit better, but it's still, there's a lot of manual review in that process. If we're talking about applications or structured data, information that's coming out of systems, think of task management systems that allow us to analyze who got notice, when they were interacting with the task. And we can do all that on a programmatic basis to understand, well, Jonathan logged in every morning to understand what was on his plate, and he logged in at 7:53 in the morning, but he didn't clock in until 8 in the morning. Well, that's interesting because we've got a 7-minute gap. We can do all that without reading documents, without analyzing it. So volume becomes much less of an issue if you're thinking time and expenses. It has exponential value, though, if you understand it, so that we can analyze it. And we're not saying, let's sample Jonathan's days. Let's look, here and there. We can say, I want everything. I want to understand every day and every first touch, every first interaction, as compared to his time and attendance records, as compared to his performance and what he was doing or claiming that he was overworked. All of those elements that allow us to step back and say what was really happening and not review documents. We're not focused on what did Jonathan say he did. I worked really hard on Saturday, except for the fact that we know you never logged into the system.
It's not true. It's not true. I work on Saturdays, but this is, now I understand why, Hunter, you have me using a task management system.
No comment.
I see what's going on. All right. So why does this matter? I mean, is the fact that we now have big data, complex data, evolving data, at the end of the day, is it an advantage or a disadvantage for a litigator?
It can be both. If you control it, it's an advantage. If you don't control it and the other side has better control over the narrative, you lost, right? Because we have to remember, at the end of the day, particularly in litigation, you have to be able to tell the story. And so if you control that data, you have the ability to control that narrative. And if we look at that and say, I understand what happened better, and I have supporting evidence to go with it, and it's rarely perfect in your direction, right? There's mistakes that happen in business. There are situational problems that may arise that skew the data one way or the other for a temporary period. But if we know about those, and we can sit there, in one case, for example, we were able to isolate the potential problem down to 2 different locations over 3 weeks. It was not pervasive across dozens of locations across the entire United States. It was isolated. And it turns out that it was a bad training module that didn't get rolled out soon enough, and we had some bad actions. But we knew that before opposing counsel did. And so we were able to control that narrative better. And when you look at that, absolute advantage. pulling a whole bunch of information and dumping it onto another party that then they control it better, they understand the data better, that's a disadvantage. You want to make sure that you're in that control mechanism.
So then, are litigators expected to know how to navigate this, or is this more of a collaborate with the expert approach?
They have to know everything. I'm kidding.
And they know everything.
So look, at the end of the day, even internally at iDS, we know what we've experienced, and we know how to approach different problems. We know that there are a lot of variety of different HR systems or different construction management systems, or you name it, out there. And they all have 80% commonality between them, but the 20% unique is different. And so we look at that and say, we reach out to our own collective team and say, who knows this system or who has had experience, because we can leverage that to the client's benefits. Well, litigation counsel is in the same boat. They just may have to go outside the firm. And so it's the opportunity to engage experts or those that do this day in and day out, not to choose your path of litigation or your legal strategy, but to help you gain those insights into what the data is telling you, so that you don't want that surprise going into deposition. You want to know what that data tells you. So that's where the outside expertise in data analytics or in structured data and forensics comes into play, again, to the counselor's advantage.
Yeah, I really like one of the things that you said, Hunter, which is a piece of this has to be not just collaborating with the expert. I think it's with the experts. That the deeper the bench, the greater the experience of the collective team of experts that you are going to collaborate with, makes a significant difference in terms of being able to control to understand the data, leverage the data, make it an advantage. In your example, it was, okay, so 80% is common, 20% is not. While you may not be familiar with it, one of our colleagues certainly could. And you also talked about the fact that in some cases you're looking at analytics, but there needs to be a bit of digital forensics expertise applied.
Absolutely.
So, right?
And everybody's experience is unique, right? So they've had some experience with a client, and I was just talking to somebody earlier this week, and he was talking about how the power of peer review and being able to ask a team is so advantageous, because you know how you do it, or you know how you've done it, but you may not know the best way. And so that collaboration, well, I just got forwarded an email thread from a client where I could, I got forwarded the whole thread, but it was an internal ask of, hey, does anybody know that? And I know this, and I would refer you to this. And so the way it kind of all built was incremental information or insights that ultimately led to, hey, call iDS, so that they know this element we've now identified as an issue. They're the ones you want to call. And so it's a building of collaboration. It's not just it right from the onset.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Building on the collaboration. Okay. Last question. What should the next generation of lawyers just getting started be thinking about?
Ooh, that's a good one. I mean, obviously, you have to be dabbling in AI. You have to understand it. This is not a full-scale replacement. You have to understand the boundaries or the limits of the technology out there. And so if you're not, a lot of folks refer to it with me as tinkering with something new. This is exploring new opportunities, even if it's on your personal time, and just exploring how it can be leveraged, and trying to find the boundaries is going to help you understand how it could or couldn't, so that you're thinking outside that box. Dan and I will often say, box? What box? We're not thinking outside the box. We don't even acknowledge that there is a box there. So especially as you're starting to explore, you have to focus on the question, why? Understanding the why behind something, and asking that question, and being okay asking that question, and getting an answer that you may not be ready for, I think is key. Because if you understand, why are we doing it this way? Why are we asking those questions? Why did we ask them that way? Now you actually start to understand the logic behind it and the strategy. beyond just the tactical questions, so that when you start to develop your own questions, when you start to develop your own strategies, you've got this inherent experience through somebody else that they've built it up, but you now have a new lens. You now have a new skill set in a new technology world, but you need that foundational understanding. And so you bring those two things together, and you'll start seeing new opportunities that others won't, because you've actually taken the courage and said, why?
That's awesome. Do you want to incorporate your tagline? You didn't say the magic words yet.
Well,
this is your last chance.
Oh, well, my favorite quote from Ted Lasso: "Be curious, not judgmental," when he's referencing Walt Whitman. And I think that if you think about what we've been talking about today, that be curious element and asking the questions. And the one thing that we haven't talked about is giving pause, right? And the ability to step back and say, not everybody's willing to answer a question really right away, and giving them the space. I have found, particularly when you're asking a lot of questions of somebody, they may slow down on their answers, and those might be the best answers you get. So not rushing for answers, but giving the space is also extremely advantageous.
So do I now hear that perhaps we've got a different slogan, an additional one? Be curious and pause?
Oh, there'll be some variations that are released through the year. I mean, we're gonna have fun with it, right? But be curious is the core of everything, and exploring those new frontiers, not accepting the status quo just because it is the status quo, and then making sure that you're getting a variety of perspectives. Everybody's got different experiences that need to be brought to the table.
Yeah. So it'll be curious ...
Ooh, I like that.
Working on it for you. Heard you got a guy who does marketing at iDS. Maybe you should leverage him.
Can you give me his name? I haven't met him yet.
Well, with that, I want to thank you, Hunter, for joining me today. I'd also like to thank our regular subscribers and those that may be first-time listeners for spending the time with us. If you'd like to learn more about iDS, or you want to subscribe to our iDS Talks podcast, you can visit idsinc.com or go to your favorite podcast platform. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to talking more about data with you on our next edition of iDS Talks.